everybody, it is Mike here from AutoGuide. Today, let's talk about Mustangs. Now, with the GTD just being introduced as basically the Super Mustang, and there already being some special editions, I thought I'd go back and take a look at the 10 best Mustangs of all time. Now, I'm not talking about a specific year, make, model, I'm talking about the best 10 packages that came on the Mustang. Now, I know you'll probably be screaming at your screen during this video saying I got it all wrong, but this is my personal list. That said, I do think I've covered 10 very important Mustangs over the years, if not the most 10 important, but that's for you to decide, so let's get right into the list. The dark horse was the new kid in town until the GTD showed up, and it was also the best performing Mustang of the new generation until the GTD showed up. But unlike that car, the dark horse is not a full-blown race car wearing a Mustang costume. It is more like the Boss models of old, a track-ready version of the street Mustang. With 500 horsepower, big brakes, sticky tires, and adjustable suspension, and other goodies here and there, it's the perfect weapon for the weekend track warrior that's looking for a brand new Mustang. So way back in 1968, California auto dealers convinced Ford to create a special version of the Mustang for their state only, although it ended up being sold in many other states and everywhere down the road, but that's beside the point. Called the GTCS California Special, the car borrowed a lot of styling elements from the Shelby Mustangs of the time to look sportier and faster. Although performance was unchanged, the car had its own unique look that sort of split the difference between regular Mustangs and the Super Shelbys. Now, not many of the original California Specials were made, and since they didn't really grab the headlines, they haven't all been kept, so there's even fewer available today, which makes it quite a collector special. Starting in the mid-2000s, around 2007, Ford started using the GTCS package again on Mustangs, and for most of the years up until today, it's been offered, and once again, it's more of an appearance package than an actual performance package. EcoBoost what? Turbocharged 4-cylinder engines in a Mustang aren't anything new. In fact, it wasn't even anything new when the SBO showed up. Ford had been doing it for years, although the early Turbo 4s didn't make much power and weren't that great. When the SBO showed up in 1984, power was now up to 175 horsepower, which might sound like nothing in today's standards, but back then that was quite a bit of power. And during the SBO's run, power would eventually go up to 200 horsepower, and a few lucky individuals even got 205 horsepower. But the Mustang SBO was more than just an engine. The brakes, steering, transmission, and suspension were all upgraded. You may be noticing a theme in this video about these special packages. The rear came standard with a limited slip differential, and the car had some very distinct aerodynamic styling along with a big functional hood scoop. So it's pretty much impossible to talk about the Mustang without talking about the GT. Since it was introduced as an equipment package in 1965, the GT badge and high-performance Mustangs have a long history together. They kind of go hand in hand doing burnouts across North America. Who knows how many hundreds of thousands of Mustangs have the GT badge glued to their trunk lid. Although there was a big gap through the 70s without GTs, from the Fox body days right up until now, GT meant you had the right engine under the hood more or less, a big growly V8. And although it may not be as track dedicated as other vehicles on this list, the GT usually also came with visual upgrades along with better mechanics to put all that power to the ground. So the first Bullet Mustang wasn't actually called that, but it earned its nickname due to its iconic role in the movie that was called, you guessed it, Bullet, starring Steve McQueen. The car chase really sort of cemented its legendary status. It was a 1968 Mustang with a 390 engine with a lot of the exterior dress-up stripped off, and it came of course in dark green. Although it took a long time, in 2001 Ford finally released an official Bullet Mustang to commemorate the original 1968. It had upgraded mechanics, including a bump in engine power, it wore retro-inspired wheels, it had grippy tires, and of course it could come in dark green. For the 2008 and 2009 model years, Ford once again introduced the Bullet model, and it also had a bump in power, could come in dark green or black, and stripped off any exterior flashy bits that weren't needed. Oh, and it sounded great thanks to a reworked air intake and exhaust. The Bullet did appear for a third time, again from 2019 to 2020, and guess what? It was available in dark green and black, and it stripped off a lot of flashy exterior bits, and it sounded great with a more powerful V8. Let's get the dad jokes out right away. No, this Mustang could not hit Mach 1. But like the ambitious name alludes, these were some very fast Mustangs. First introduced in 1969, the Mach 1 was a performance version of the Mustang. It could be had with a trio of beefy V8s, including the ridiculously powerful Cobra Jet 428 cubic inch monster. In 1971, there would be an introduction of a second generation Mach 1 that some argue may be the best styled one, and it again had a trio of V8 engines. It would last all the way through the rest of the first generation Mustangs run, and then when the Mustang 2 came along, you know that Mustang, the Mach 1 name remained, and in 1975 it only came with a 105 horsepower V6 as the base engine, yet ironically that was its best sales year. But I think people got turned off pretty quick because in 1977 that was the Mach 1's worst sales year, and the car would only last one more year, and when the Fox Buddy arrived, there was no more Mach 1. But don't worry, after a long hiatus, the Ford Mustang Mach 1 did return in 2003, and it had a more powerful V8 and other mechanical upgrades, and of course the exterior was reworked to look like some of those original Mach 1s from the 60s and 70s. Then in 2021, just a couple years ago, the Mach 1 came back again, once again sporting the stripes and stickers package that mimic the original Mach 1s, and the V8 under the hood made anywhere from 470 to 480 horsepower depending on the year, and there were a lot of mechanical bits borrowed for this car from the Shelby GT350, which we'll get to later on this list. So 1969 was a pretty banner year for the Mustang, and another special edition, well actually two special editions, arrived, and they were the Boss Mustangs. So starting with the Boss 302, it had a small block V8, and it was pretty much a race car for the street, designed for the SCCA Trans Am series, you know, to go take on the Camaro, which had been doing pretty well. The exterior removed any unneeded body cladding, there was a front spoiler added, there was a rear spoiler added, and the V8 was worked on, and although it was rated at 290 horsepower, it probably made a lot more. So the other Boss introduced that year was the complete opposite. It was a drag race monster called the Boss 429, and you guessed it, it had a 429 big block cubic inch V8 under the hood, and it had 375 horsepower, but it's more the Olympic pool-sized torque that really made this car special. Now those two cars would last for another year, but in 1971, a very limited edition Boss showed up called the Boss 351, and a lot consider this maybe the most special vehicle because it sort of split the difference between the 302 and the 429. It was quicker in a straight line than the 302, but it handled much better than the 429, so it was kind of a best of both worlds approach. But these cars, even in 1971, were ultra rare with less than 2,000 produced, and there's a lot fewer of them left around today. Like a lot of the other vehicles on this list, the Boss name did return, but unlike a lot of those names, it's only come back once so far. In 2012, Ford revived the Boss 302 name, and it once again was a very track-focused version of the Mustang. It had a 5-liter V8 engine again, much like the original car, but it was quite different, and all of the tires, brakes, suspension were upgraded to get the most potential on a road course. But if the Boss 302 wasn't quite enough, there was the Laguna Seca version, which looked fantastic and upped the performance ante even further. I still really want one of those cars. Alright, moving on to the most famous tuner of Mustangs, and that is Shelby. So in 1967, Shelby decided to add another Mustang to their already successful GT350, which we'll get to later, and that was the GT500. In this new car, Shelby stuffed the 428 cubic inch V8 and various other exterior upgrades and basically made it a drag strip monster. A year later, the car became the Mustang Cobra GT500 KR for King of the Road, and now Ford was factory installing a big block V8, the 428 Cobra Jet, But then the year after that, in 1969, it would once again be called the GT500 before disappearing in 1970. Now, like Michael Jordan, this car keeps coming back. So in 2007, Ford revived the trim with a 500 horsepower, 5.4 liter supercharged V8. And once again, there's also a GT500 KR model available that made 540 horsepower, which at the time was basically a stupid amount of power. In 2010, the Mustang got restyled and tweaked, and now all GT500s had the 540 horsepower engine, and a year later, with the revision of the engine, it was now 550 horsepower. But wait, Ford wasn't done yet. In 2013, an all-new Shelby GT500 was introduced, and now it had an insane 662 horsepower, 5.8 liter supercharged V8. It of course had significant upgrades all around to handle this extra power, and the exterior was special with GT500 stripes so people knew what you were driving. But the real king of the GT500s, well, that came in 2020. So it had a 5.2 liter supercharged V8, so it's smaller than the last one, so it's less powerful, right? Well, no, this made 760 horsepower and 662 pound-feet of torque. There were massive sticky rear tires trying to get that power to the ground, and when hooked up, this car absolutely blasted in a straight line. Okay, we're almost at number one, and maybe a lot of people won't agree with this, but I think it's pretty cool, maybe because I grew up with them. But from 1993 until 2004, high-performance Mustangs wore a SBT Cobra badge. They had more power, better handling, and they enhanced the driving experience as well as looked really cool. These Cobras were a step above V8 Mustangs, but if even more performance was needed, there were a few special Cobras called the Cobra R. So the first Cobra appeared in 1993, and although it used the Cobra's 235 horsepower 5 liter V8, everything else basically was upgraded. Upgraded shocks, larger brakes, bigger wheels, extra cooling, bigger tires, and any unneeded items inside like the rear seat, air conditioning, stereo, they're all tossed aside for better weight. In 1995, Ford's SBT department took things a step further. Now it ditched the 5 liter V8 for a 300 horsepower 5.8 liter V8. And other track-ready upgrades included a fuel cell, heavy-duty springs, thick stabilizer bars, front strut tower brace, and again, weight savings was a huge focus, so rear seat, it's gone again. Power windows, air conditioning, nope. Radio, who needs it? But it's the final Cobra R, the 2000 Cobra R, that holds a special place in the Mustang community. So like the previous two models, any unnecessary weight was ditched, so stereo, rear seat, air conditioning, all gone. And the car now had a 5.4 liter V8 that made 385 horsepower. But it was the exterior that was really the biggest change. It had full race car aerodynamics, including a massive rear spoiler, which wasn't really a thing back then, although nowadays everybody seems to have 8-foot spoilers on the back of their cars. To say this car's become a bit of a collector's item is understated, as they're fetching crazy amounts of money at auctions. I'm someone who likes a vehicle's overall performance, so it should come as no surprise that the number one car on this list is the Shelby GT350, which has always been a very track-focused version of the Stang. So only a year after the original Mustang was released, Ford and Shelby teamed up to make the GT350. It was a Mustang designed for the track. The 289 cubic inch V8 was tweaked to about 306 horsepower, and any extra weight like the rear seat was ripped out. Now that first year it was only painted white, and the GT350R absolutely terrorized racetracks. And although the GT350 would last till 1970, none were ever as raw and potent as that first vehicle. The Shelby name was kind of bounced around on different Mustangs over the years, and in 2011 there was a Shelby GT350, but it was more of a aftermarket deal where Ford would ship a completed Mustang GT to Shelby's factory to get the GT350 conversion. This would last for a couple years, but then in 2015, Ford brought back a factory-created Shelby GT350. Now, any worries that these new cars wouldn't live up to the legends of the 60s were quickly squashed. Under the hood was a 5.2 liter flat plane crank V8 that made 526 horsepower and could scream to over 8,000 RPMs, and oh man, did it sound amazing. But the engine, of course, wasn't the only part of the story. Unlike the drag race ready GT500s that have been around for years, the 350 was once again meant for track duty. and it could go toe-to-toe with Corvettes and 911s of its time. But if an even more track-focused GT350 was needed, there was the GT350R, which had less weight and grippier tires. The model lasted until 2020, and we were very sad to see it go. So there you have it. There's the top 10 Mustangs according to me. Let me know in the comments which ones you would have put in instead, or what order you would have had. You know, you could be nice in the comments. You don't have to yell at me, but if you want to, whatever. Let me know what your thoughts are. There should be more lists like this coming down the road, so let me know what other cars, makes, or models you'd like to see.